So Nvidia has just announced that for GeForce Now, their 3080 tier is going to be going across onto a monthly subscription. Now, previously it was available to buy in a 6-month subscription, which you had to pay up front for. I believe it was $99.99, and you could get a discount on it if you were an early adopter. But obviously that commitment was relatively large. Now, we've been using this since December, and we've got some thoughts on it. And in today's video, we're going to discuss whether or not we think it's a good value proposition and whether or not you should invest in it. So first up, what is the 3080 tier for GeForce Now? Basically, it gives you improved graphics and in some cases improved frames per second as well, provided your device supports it. If you have a monitor that's capable of outputting resolutions of 1440p, then it will support it. And it will also support up to 120 frames per second as well. So if you have a decent end monitor for gaming and everything else like that, it could be a really good proposition to go for. Also, if you have an Nvidia Shield TV, you can output up to 4K resolution at 60 frames per second. So again, if you're after those really crisp, high-end graphics, then this tier of Nvidia GeForce Now is going to support it. Unlike their previous version, which is their main subscription that's available to people, which supports up to 1080p resolution at 60 frames per second. So in a nutshell, I suppose it's basically GeForce Now with better graphics and in some cases better frames per second. So I suppose the question is, how much does it cost? And now they've moved it across from that 6 monthly subscription onto a month subscription. Now the great thing about this is it gives people an opportunity to try it out and see whether or not they like it and whether or not the games library that they want to use is on there, and it costs $19.99 per month. Now at first glance that seems really high, and for some types of users that's going to be really good, and for some that's just going to be completely out of the park and just not worth it at all. Now before we get into the value proposition, we'll talk about our experience with this, and I've got to say, out of all the cloud gaming services, this has been the closest to replacing my gaming PC, and that's probably the type of customer that Nvidia GeForce Now are really going to be aiming for. At the end of the day, if you are a PC gamer and you have a big library on the likes of Steam or Epic Games Store or any of those, then this is going to give you access to at least some of those games. It's also going to give you really high-end graphics, and the first thing that I played on this was Chorus, and I did a live stream with Liam, and I've got to say I didn't notice any difference between playing this on my PC natively or actually streaming it. In fact, it probably looked better going through GeForce Now. Previously, whenever I've used it on my 1440p monitor, it's always just looked a little bit off because obviously it's been streaming at a maximum of 1080, and then my monitor's having to do some kind of weird stuff in the background and everything. It just never looks quite right, but on this it looked fantastic. I've also played through The Witcher 3 on my MacBook Pro, and I had that plugged into my monitor, or I played it directly on the MacBook, and all the time it has looked absolutely fantastic. The performance on GeForce Now on the 3080 tier has beaten out what my gaming PC has been capable of. Now my gaming PC has a 1080 Ti inside of it, so it does a pretty good job, but I do lose some frames per second because my CPU is just so old now that it absolutely needs replacing. So GeForce Now has really upped the game in terms of that. When it comes to latency, I basically notice nothing. There are the odd few dips here and there, but it's nothing noticeable and nothing that's game breaking. I've been able to play a hell of a lot of games and not have any interruptions at all, even when other people in the household are watching maybe something on Netflix, or they're taking up some, I guess, valuable bandwidth. Now again, your mileage will vary. If you have a slower connection or something like that that is going to cause interference, then that is something worthwhile bearing in mind. But GeForce Now has worked really well. Where it still doesn't shine is when I go across onto mobile devices. So on my MacBook or on my gaming PC, it looks really good and I have absolutely zero complaints with it. When I move across on something like my iPad Pro, or if I use it on my iPhone, I start to get some issues with resolution where it remembers maybe something that was used on my PC and it tries to squish it into my phone, and part of the screen is just not available. I've done all the bits and settings in the background, so where you go and you click and you can have it so it's meant to automatically scale dependent on device. It just never seems to work. So a lot of the times I then have to go into the game settings, change the resolutions manually until I get something that works with it. Once I do get something that works with it, it looks really good. It's very playable, but it's just a bit frustrating at times. It just doesn't quite load natively like I would like it to, but fingers crossed that's something that can be fixed. And then of course the final issue with GeForce Now, and this isn't just necessarily exclusive to the 3080 tier, but it is the lack of games. Now, it's not like an Exodus and there are no games at all to play. There is a decent chunk of my library on there, and a lot of the games that I go to tend to be there. But there are a few times when I've gone to load up some of my games on my Steam library, they're just not available. And I do wish that Nvidia would sort this out with publishers. I know it's probably not as easy as just clicking your fingers and making it done, but even if they had a higher price tier, I'd be willing to pay it and probably move exclusively over to something like the 3080 tier as my main gaming device, gaming PC, whatever you want to call it, if they could get pretty much all of my games onto that library. But alas, they haven't, and it's really frustrating, and sometimes games disappear and sometimes they don't work. And to link in with that last one, I suppose sometimes games just don't work. Divinity Original Sin 2 is a prime example of that. I wanted to play it, I think it was in January I started attempting to play it, and it was just broken for like a month or 2 months, and you couldn't play it. Now apparently it wasn't an issue with the developers, and they kept on pushing it back to Nvidia, but there's been a few times where games are meant to work on it, they're available to work on it, and they just won't. They won't work on a PC, they won't work on a mobile device, and that's happened with a couple of different games. And when I've searched on forums, it just seems to be radio silent. So again, something to bear in mind. It can break and your game can stop being compatible for whatever bizarre reason. Divinity is now working on it again, so it works perfectly fine, just a bit of a bizarre one. So that's our brief summary of the 3080 tier, and I've got to say, the good outweighs the bad massively. It's a really, really good proposition. Now the question is it good value for you gamers out there? And it is a really, really hard sell. Like I said, I would potentially move across to this if they could iron out the library and just get everything on there. As a PC gamer, I do think that this is pretty good value. If you think it's like $240 per year, versus trying to buy a new GPU at the moment, or even a new motherboard, or basically anything that's going to go into your PC. Fortunately, mine is just about hanging on, but if you are in that transition stage where you do need new hardware, it is going to cost a hell of a lot of money. However, if your games that you go to are on Nvidia GeForce Now, then it's probably a good deal, at least something to tide you over until GPU prices and everything else start to sort themselves out and come back down to earth if they ever do. Even at a reasonable cost in terms of GPUs and everything else, $240 per year to get this level of performance and be able to play on pretty much any of your devices is a pretty good deal if you ask me. But again, that's if you're more of a PC gamer and this is what you've always been into in the past. On the flip side, it's not good value if you look at something like an Xbox Series S. Pretty much for like, what, $10 more, you could buy the Xbox Series S and have that hardware in your house. Now, I know a lot of people are probably starting to smash their keyboards and say, yeah, but you can't stream those games to like your iPad, your iPhone, you can't have it on mobile. But actually you can, because you have the Xbox Remote Play as well. So you could get your games on your Xbox and still have that ability to play those games on any other devices. And the good thing is then you own those games and you own the hardware as well, and you're not having to pay past that first year. Granted, there are additional costs that come with the Xbox as well. You're probably going to end up getting something like Game Pass or anything else there, and you have to buy those games, but you do have to buy the games on Nvidia GeForce Now as well. So it is a tricky one, and ultimately I do think if you're a PC gamer and you don't want to have to fork out a massive amount up front to get some of that hardware, and the games that you play are supported through Nvidia GeForce Now, the 3080 tier is actually a pretty good value, especially now it's available through the monthly option, because that way at least you can try it out and see how well it works. I've had an absolute blast using it, and it's the closest I've come to having something that would absolutely 100% replace my actual dedicated hardware for gaming. It's not quite there yet just because of the library side of things. However, like I said, if you had the alternative and you wanted to be able to pick up something like an Xbox Series S, that doesn't cost that much more. And I know other people might be saying, well, you can get Nvidia GeForce Now on a monthly subscription. Well, Microsoft offers the Xbox Series S on a lot of monthly subscriptions as well. So there is that ability, and you can do things like the Xbox Remote Play on the Xbox Series S, so it kind of gives you the benefits that you're going to get on something like the GeForce Now tier. So I know I've not answered anybody's question really. Is it good value for money? On the one hand, yes. If you are a PC gamer, you don't want to fork out for that extra hardware, your hardware has come to end of life, then this could be a really good way to tide you over. Even if you're wanting to dabble in PC gaming and just see what's available, take advantage of some of those incredible Steam sales, then Nvidia GeForce Now could be a great way to play. It's just worthwhile bearing in mind there are alternatives out there as well that are worthwhile trying out, and also you can go for the cheaper tiers on Nvidia GeForce Now. And I've got to say, if I wasn't doing the cloud gaming channel side of things, I would opt probably for the 1080 tier, just because I don't need the extra power of the 3080. It's nice to have, but because I still have my PC, which is capable of doing some decent performance, I would stick with the 1080. stream some games on my different devices, and just take advantage of my PC. So see what suits you best, see what your library is like, see what's supported on this, and that will hopefully give you a better idea of whether or not it's going to be worth it for you. Now let us know in the comments, are you using the 38 tier? What do you think of it? Or are you using another cloud gaming service? Now I haven't talked about those services just because this is more whether or not this in its own little thing is worth it. And I've got to say, all the cloud gaming services are getting very, very close in terms of performance. They're getting a decent amount of library as well. But this is focused for all you GeForce fans, or maybe people who are looking at this service to see whether or not it's going to be worth it for you. Hope you've enjoyed that video. If you have, hit the like and subscribe button. Come along for some more cloud gaming content in the future, and we'll see you soon. Bye.